Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Post Military Podcast. Today on the show, we have Tyler Schmoker, who was an Army combat engineer with a diverse set of experiences in the service. After leaving active duty, Tyler worked in the National Guard and as a paramilitary contractor. After leaving that life behind, Tyler began working in corporate security where he picked up mountaineering and started posting content on LinkedIn. Tyler still works in corporate consulting and has cultivated a large following on LinkedIn. In the episode, we talk about fighting against imposter syndrome, becoming a holistic person through hobbies, and fostering community, and much more. One final note. I've included timestamps in the description so you can see the major subjects covered. So, head down there to see if there might be a specific topic that interests you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Post Military Podcast. With me today is someone that if you're on LinkedIn, you've seen him before, Tyler Schmoker. Tyler, thanks so much for coming on.
Billy, I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to digging into the military transition playbook.
I'm really excited to add your advice and stories to that playbook for everyone out there who's listening. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Tell everybody out there a little bit about your time in the service.
I entered the service back in 1999. Actually, I was delayed entry program in 98. And so I think I was in the Army 8 days or five days or 8 days. I can't remember which after high school, but essentially graduated from high school and went to basic training. So I was an enlisted person. I was originally qualified as an equipment operator, so in the engineering regiments, then throughout the course of career, reclassified as a combat engineer, also bridging. And I consider myself a combat engineer first. And a majority of my PME professional military education was all combat engineering focused. So I did my first enlistment on active duty. And so this was in the early 2000s when I transitioned into the National Guard with aspirations of going to college, getting a degree using GI Bill, and then figuring out what I wanted to do. And that was at the time when being in the National Guard or the reserves was starting to get a little bit busier. So I would say for all intents and purposes, although my first enlistment was my only enlistment in the active component, for all intents and purposes, the better part of 9 years, I was in the military full time for a living between deployments, training exercises, and then picking up semesters here and there where I could. So then from there, I was able to branch out a little bit and split my time between drilling reservist time and then being a paramilitary contractor, did some embedded work in Afghanistan on government contracts and continued to serve within the National Guard, eventually the Army Reserve. And I retired right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was a good time to separate from the service. So I was just shy of 21 total years of service. I retired as a master sergeant from the reserves.
So when you said you did your paramilitary work, what does that entail exactly?
So I got onto a contract, and originally, from the way I understand it, it was in 2008 or 2009, even private contracting organizations were starting to have trouble finding people. So early on in GWAT, they were hiring ex-Green Berets, ex-Navy SEALs, and then over time, they started to have trouble staffing those billets. So I actually got into a billet that I think was originally structured similar to a Special Forces ODA, where it had like a engineering sergeant, weapons sergeant, recce, intelligence, those types of things. But they adjusted the contract a bit to be able to staff the roles. And so they were embedded roles with the Afghan National Army supporting a battalion or a Kandak. The requirements changed. So I got in on a billet as a E7 or higher combat engineer who had deployment experience and some other requirements to basically be an ad hoc fill for I think it's an 18 Charlie engineering sergeant. Maybe I got the nomenclature wrong, but so I did that for about 9 months. And then from there, opened up the door to where I had some other opportunities to do some other contracts where now I had that on my resume. And although I wasn't a special operator, I'd been on similar programs and done some similar training. So I ended up on a contract for the State Department, training for a brief period of time, and ended up exiting that one a little bit early, and then did some other training support work for some other government organizations back here in the US, and then eventually migrated into like corporate and commercial security, working for some large firms. And that's where I'm still at today.
We'll dive into kind of what your professional life looks like out of the military here in a bit. But when you were transitioning from, why did you decide to go from active duty into the guard? Was that something you had always planned on doing, or was that something that just happened?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to go on and get a degree or find some other things to do. And
Mm,
the goal early on was to just be in the military. Come from a family that has some military history and tradition. So I would say we're reasonably patriotic, but it's not like there were predefined, you had to get to this rank, you had to be in this branch of service, any of those types of things. It was
mhm,
more so just some of the folks in my family had served and they were proud of that. So that's something I want to do. And when I was leaving high school, I just didn't feel like I was probably quite ready to go into college and be as disciplined as I needed to be. So the military was a good fit. And obviously there's some financial incentives. A poor kid from North Dakota, it's a way to pay for your school if you ever decided to go. So I looked at it as having one of those clear benefits that was available and taking advantage of that. And then even when I was in the active component, you get a lot of the seniors, NCOs and officers and those who'd stayed in a career, and like the NCOs would say, well, I never went to college. I'm just going to retire and do that. And so I want to give it a shot. And plus, when you're a junior enlisted person and lieutenants or officers coming in, the scope of responsibility that they have and some of the things that they're doing, and you're living lower enlisted life, it's well, you know, I'd like to get some of that, right? So it's, well, maybe I can do a reset. So just probably a lot of lower enlisted people, they think, well, maybe I'll go OCS or maybe I'll go ROTC and come back in. And all of those different contingencies went through my mind of, well, I'll
yeah.
do this thing for that thing and this thing for that thing.
Mm,
And I decided I'd give it a shot. I could still serve in the National Guard and get a different frame of reference. So that's what I did in a sense, and started going to school. And of course, 9/11 happened, and add on top of that, stateside deployments and activations with the National Guard, you become pretty operationally busy pretty quickly. And so, well, I just need to find a way to make this work best for me. And for me, it involved maybe not going too deep into any single pipeline over the course of my career, but I was able to touch on a lot of different things. So I have added perspective. So I wouldn't consider myself anyone that's been at the elite level or tip of the spear on anything in particular, but I've been able to try a lot of different things and work with some really exceptional people, being a fairly competent soldier within the conventional ranks, and then doing some paramilitary work and working with some of those special operators that a lot of people look up to, and getting some of that rub off of them and learning some of the things that they do, mindset and skill sets and those types of things. And then also applying that post military. And really for me, it was a bit of an overlap, but post military, getting into the corporate sector and doing external consultancy type of work for security firms. So a big frame of reference, really.
as you continued to touch more and more things, as you said, you never went too deep in anything, but you touched a
Hmm.
lot of things.
Hmm.
How have you gotten over the idea of almost the, well, what's the word I'm thinking of? I want to say survivor's guilt, but that's not the right thing. It's oh man, where you don't feel like you're qualified for something even though you might be. Like
Oh,
that, yeah, you know what I'm talking. Imposter syndrome,
imposters.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you work through that as someone who's really dipped their toes into a lot of different things throughout their career?
So I think first and foremost, it doesn't really matter who you are. I think pretty much everyone suffers from imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Like even taking it back to a purely military context, like I remember being pretty young guy at the time. I don't even think I was legal drinking age yet. And I went to air assault school. And so you're going to a school that's pretty reputation perceives itself for being pretty challenging,
Mhm.
high attrition rate. I don't know, 40, 50%, something like that. And so I'm an E3 or an E4 at the time, still a fairly young soldier, still learning how to soldier, and then going to a really demanding course. And so you get there and you're standing in those muster formations on the first day and you're looking around and you see who's got all the skill identifiers and all these different ranks and all those different types of things. And so you're like, well, what am I even doing here? But then as you start to get into it operationally, I think if you have your wits about you, you can start to see that, look, they're just people like I am. And so I just need to focus on what I'm doing and it's task condition standards, right? So whether I'm an E3 or an E4 and I'm fairly junior, hadn't had a deployment yet, pretty inexperienced, if I can focus on those fundamentals, I can hang with just about anyone. So for me, being able to apply that mindset and going into a contract and you're around a bunch of Navy SEALs and Marine recon guys and special forces operators, Rangers. And so my resume is okay, but it's not that good, but it's the same thing. Just pay attention to the task condition standards, bring what you bring to the dance, and you can take yourself really far. Even still today, when you're doing that initial orientation period or getting familiarized with a new team, like it's natural to size people up and think, well, they have this and I don't have this. What am I even doing here? But you just have to get into it, give it a little bit of space to develop and determine where you can leverage your skill sets and bring them towards like the team effort and make yourself valuable. So that's what I've always done. Resumes are important, but really it's in the here and now of how can you conceptualize and then how can you execute upon that? And then all of those tchotchkes from your past life, yet they have some value and they speak to maybe your character and like your resiliency. But on any given day, it's how you perform. And that's what really measures your value, I think.
First, love the word tchotchke. That's a great. I don't hear that much out here in California, so I appreciate bringing in that Midwest vernacular. But for people who are, how do you think people can set aside those previous things that they've had? Because I think as people leave the military, they're really tied to their previous experience, almost to their detriment in some ways. But more so for everyone else, how can you put aside or build separation between what you've done in the past and not having that feed into your current day performance?
Sure. So I'll offer the disclaimer and say that I'm much better at doing this now than I used to be.
Of course.
So I'll say transitioning from active duty and even very operationally intensive National Guard member, like going just exercise deployment training after one after the other. When I reached a point where I got a bachelor's degree and now I'm going to get a job that pays a bunch of money and I've managed people, so I'm going to manage people. I could say admittedly that that happened for me at a time when the economy was in rough shape and I had an almost exclusively military background and not a lot outside of that, and applying for positions that maybe in a good economy, I would have been a long shot, but where the economy was at the time, it wasn't really probable. And I didn't really realize that. So I think it took me quite a few years to finally die that ego death, where I realized that maybe I'm not the stuff, at least not in this realm, and take a step back, take some entry level roles, and then come in and just start learning stuff and flowing with the tides and growing that way. Like a lot of people, I burned a lot of time thinking I did this past thing or I'm this rank and I've had $20 billion worth of equipment on my hand or seat and I've led 60 people. So why aren't they just giving me this role up? It doesn't really work that way. And in fact, it doesn't work that way really in the best of economic times. So there's that point where you realize it's like, I just need to take a step back and think about it like you're going into a new unit, right? Where you're going to go in, get the lay of the land, learn their TTPs, learn how their SOPs and the things that they're doing, and then just start developing, because you can't grow within the house unless you get in the door. So just be willing to do what you have to do to get into the door. But now I would say for me, it's a lot easier because I've done it so many times and I've dabbled in so many different things that I seldom ever fall back on back when I was at this school or back when I did this thing, whether it's a degree or a military school or back in a certain unit, because I've bounced around enough and done different things. I've learned that you have some real hardcore, excellent leaders and capable professionals that come from all different walks of life. And right when I was transitioning from being fairly wired type military guy to trying to get into the corporate sector, thinking, well, the military way is the right way and these people just don't get it, then you start to realize there's a lot of elite people out there. They're just doing different things. They just didn't go into the military. They just did other stuff. So the context is a little bit different. But so again, there are apex operators all over the place and they weren't all in the military. So I want a chance to meet those people wherever they are and see how they do things.
Yeah, I think you bring up an amazing point, which is the context is different. And for people coming out of the military, we really do, I believe, fall into this trap that our way is the best way.
Hmm.
And it's really easy to allow that ego to affect our decision making because we look at people and go, oh, well, back when I was in the service and I did X, Y, and Z, or all the elite people served in the military, and there's not like these super high class folks out here in the regular world. And I
Hmm.
think that you just bring up an amazing point that it's like there's a lot of really skilled, very effective, very high powered folks out there that just didn't serve in the military, and
Right.
working with those people is really beneficial because they bring a perspective that we've never had in the service, which I think is very important.
Absolutely.
For you as someone who's been very broad, and I want this is the last question I'm interested in getting into, and then we'll go talk about your transition experience more in depth. As someone who's been very broad, I think a lot of people hear this concept of like, oh, you need to be specialized, or oh, you need to really dive into this one specific subject. What would be your argument against that as someone who is successful and has really done a lot of different things in their life?
So I think that it's important to have some semblance of a coherent strategy to what you're doing if you want to truly progress. Although I've done some different things, there's reasonable lines of connection between them where they were complementary and you're accumulating uh, I guess I don't really know the term for sure, but you're compounding interest, right? So compounding interest on investments. So I'm going to do this thing. Well, it's going to lead into that thing. It's going to lead into the next thing. So it wasn't so extreme that I was always starting over necessarily, but compounding professional interest, I guess, is probably the best way that I can put it. And honestly, just dabbling and keeping yourself and being curious and being interested in different things. Because if like to your question about niching down, because that's all the rage right now. You niche down, you're find your niche. I don't. I'm not going to say you should niche down or niche up necessarily, but I think you should find niches that you're interested in because then you can play the long game.
Mm,
Because I found that I'm able to do that better than a lot of people that get burnt out and then prescribe, well, I wasn't successful because this organization sucked or
mhm,
this career field sucked or anything like that. So
mhm,
I just always make sure that I'm working on projects or working with teams and within organizations with clients that are interesting, even if it's challenging and hard at times, because they keep you curious and they keep you engaged. And that's what keeps you going the long game rather than quitting.
mm. And how do you, as someone who, I'm extending this, I'm sorry, I said we were going to talk about something else, but as someone who you talk about things that you're interested in, and this really does feed into the transition conversations, how have you figured out what you're interested in a career sense? Because something else I want to talk about later on in this is you're a very avid outdoorsman. You love climbing. You're a big mountaineer, um, but you don't do that for a job. So that's something you're passionate
Right.
about outside of your work. How did you determine? Oh, these are the things that I'm interested in for my career, and then delineating interests outside of work and interests inside of work. Because in the military, it's all kind of one big mush, and we're
Hmm.
really bad at picking all of these things and putting them in their little boxes because we've never had to do that before when we get out of the service.
Like the pipeline is set for you. Like you pick
Exactly.
an MOS, there the skill identifiers that are set for you, or the units that you're trying to go to. And over the course of 15 or 20 years, those are the things that you do. For me, it was a little bit different. I would get into a unit and maybe it's, well, this is the pipeline. You're gonna make E4, you're gonna go to air assault school, you're gonna go to sapper school, then you're gonna go to ranger school, then you're gonna go to 82nd, then you're gonna go to Q course, and that's it, right? It's so I looked at it as, well, I'm doing this now. But I always looked around, like take in the atmospherics and see the things that I really didn't want. It's, well, some of these guys did this thing, but then they're complaining about their back is shot from all the jumps or whatever. So you take in those data points too. Or if like people are complaining about money, it's like, well, I'm not really a super material or money focused person, but of course I want to be comfortable, right? So it's like, what can I do that will make me money that's going to keep me engaged and interested in what I'm doing? So you take into account the financial perspective too, understanding, of course, that you might have to get in and make less than you want to make or that you think you're worth. But if you're able to put down and do the work once you get into that organization, that'll remedy itself relatively quickly. More specifically, then, I was a lower enlisted guy. I knew I wanted to make more money than I was making. That's for sure. I wanted to get some degrees. So chances of me doing that as an equipment operator and a sapper company is probably not likely between going out to the field, going on deployments, all that stuff. So I needed to sort out that component too. And then from there, I guess my next move was like paramilitary work. I'd transitioned to the guard, but had deployed and I'd seen the contractors working in Iraq. And it's, well, that looks really rad. Like at the time, they were still wearing 511s and now they're wearing something that's more cool guy than that. But seeing those guys and they're driving around in Land Cruiser, and it's, well, I'd like to give that a shot. So that was always in the back of my mind. So then applying for jobs and eventually I got picked up and did some training courses that I wanted to do. And then you hear those guys talking about, well, I'd like to get back to the States so I can be at home, but then I can work in corporate security or executive protection or something like that. So you bank that one in the memory. It's, well, that kind of fits what I want to do. I want to be able to come home at night and see my wife and all those types of things. So I just figure out ways. And in some cases, it meant dying ego deaths along the way and say, well, I'm going to take a job for $19 an hour and I'm going to start working my way up and make things happen. So that's just what I did. I was willing to do tactical resets and tactical reboots to get the things that I wanted. And it was outside of a normal pipeline. And again, although I've never been at the apex of anything in the military or in my civilian career, cumulatively, because I've done a lot of different things, it makes for a pretty interesting story. And in fact, it's one that on paper stacks up pretty well. If you put down a 20-year ODA guy and my resume, there's in a lot of ways it blows me out of the water. But there are some interesting aspects that at least gets me conversations like, well, what's going on with this guy? Maybe we should talk to him. And then it's up to me whether I win or lose, right?
I definitely like the idea of being willing to do these out of pipeline resets, as you said, to be able to build yourself into something that you want to build yourself into. And I think that it's important, if you know what you want, or you know what values you want to emphasize, or things you want to emphasize in your life, then it becomes really easy to do those things. The question then is, how does somebody figure out what's important to them? Because I think that in the military, we don't like, we have like God, service, country. Like those are our things those are the values that are given to us. And
Hmm.
those are the values that underpin any job that you do in the military. I did cyber, but my underpinning values that provided my job purpose were service to the nation, service to country, all of the like those things. And then when I get out of the military, it's fun. Cyber is fundamentally different because it's not tied to those external values. And I think that's the same for anybody who gets out of the military. And so, how does somebody identify the values that are important to them so that they can go out of band or out of pipeline to then achieve those things within their career? That's the thing that I'm curious if you have any input on.
That's a really good question. So I think for me, I've always approached things, it's very much objective based, not dreams. Like people talk a lot about, I have a dream to do that, but dreams are like a someday thing, whereas objectives are, this is the thing that I want to do. And these are the task condition standards to do that thing. So how do I start moving towards that? In a way, I think it's a combination of almost, you have your core values, right? And whatever those are for you, family, God, country. For me, it's be legal, moral, and ethical, right? And do what I can do to get ahead, but being legal, moral, and ethical in the process. And for me, it's as much about then determining what are my methodologies to get to where I want to be. So it's not just about values. Okay, values are fine. Those are like the dreams of what you aspire to, but the methodology is how you make tick off those practical milestones to reach those objectives.
Mhm.
So that's really how I approach it. And it's allowed me to be pretty successful because even if you're in groups and you're getting influences of, well, this is the thing we do, whether it's a predefined pipeline or whether it's a specific organizational culture that's going to just lead you to a certain thing. It's like being comfortable with complying where you have to, but also being yourself where you need to, because in 5 years, you're probably not going to be around any of those people, or the big to do that's bothering you today is not even going to be on in your memory bank 5 years from now.
Mhm.
So just think forward. And it's like they talk about the 5 year plans. It's an anecdotal thing, but there's really some truth to that. So pick those 5 year milestones. Like, what things do I need to do and tick off to actually get to that
Mhm.
point? And sometimes it might not be popular, and sometimes people might give you guff for doing it, but
Mhm.
you got to do you.
You do, but sometimes that's hard. I think that like doing you in the midst of social pressure, especially in this age of social media where you hear what people are saying, or someone might go, man, Tyler's living this super cool life. He's talking about really cool stuff on LinkedIn. I want to be just like him. When in reality, your lifestyle might not be the right thing for somebody else. And I think that the just doing you, I think takes a lot more maturity than I think especially in today's day and age, than I think people are willing to admit, which is hard. I think it's a hard thing to do, or
Some of
be
that
true to
comes with
yourself.
age too, right? I'm a much different person in my 40s than I was in my 20s for sure.
Hmm.
Maybe getting closer to similarity from 30s to 40s, but just like anyone else, I gave into social pressure and made some bad decisions along the way, and
Hmm.
maybe went down some rabbit holes that wasted time, or not dying the ego death I needed to die to get moving forward.
Yeah. Have you ever had any issues looking back on those moments and beating yourself up over them? Or is it something that you're able to view as a learning experience and then move on?
Everything's cumulative, man. Of one change decision and
Hmm.
landing in a different job or a different place, you don't really know who you have in your life now or what you have in your life. Maybe it wouldn't have happened that way. So
Hmm.
I can honestly say that I'm happy. I'm happy with my life. I'm happy
Hmm.
with my career. I'm happy with my family.
Good.
I, it went all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think no, I think that's the right approach, and I've definitely been able to say that about a lot of things in my life as well. And I think that really is the only way for people to look at like another easy like you need to do yourself. That's an easy thing to say. That's a hard thing to execute. Another one
Mhm,
is hindsight is 2020. I think that a lot of people, for whatever reason, they really love armchair quarterbacking their own
mhm.
decisions after everything shook out and be like, why did I do that? Look what happened. And not being able to separate themselves and go, well, you didn't know when
Right.
you made the best decision, hopefully, with the information you had at the time. And there's no way you could have known that X would have happened or Z would have happened. And there's really no reason to invest energy on anything else. And I think that's something that's really important that a lot of people like I don't know, that some people just at the end of the day don't really give themselves the grace to do when
Yeah.
they're reevaluating their past decisions.
Spend more time and energy on 80/20 and
Yeah,
planning and less on 20/20 and looking back.
100%. I think that's a wise words, Tyler. So when going back to your transition story, it's really cool because you really went from like active to guard, but right when 9/11 happened. So you were really deploying just as much to doing the guard and you were doing this paramilitary work. So you've almost always been doing military stuff for a large portion of your career. So when
Yes.
would you say that your military transition happened? Because this is probably the most non-traditional career of somebody that I've interviewed so far. So when would you say that transition point actually happened for you?
Okay, so chronologically, I guess I separated from the active component in 2003. I'd been at Fort Polk JRTC, so
Mhm.
3 weeks in the box, 1 week out, like
Yeah.
in perpetuity. I did my last year on the Korean border. I was up in Area 1, so very operationally engaged, and I think that probably contributed to somewhat. So I'm gonna go into the Guard a while since I got Fort Polk and JRTC, and then I got Korea and
Yeah.
on the reenlistment. No choice of duty station, no choice of schools, anything. So I'm gonna choose the National Guard then. So I got into the Guard, and Louisiana is a state where a lot of disasters and a lot of stuff happens. So you get mobilized a lot.
Mhm.
And the problem is it's not 6 months or a year and you go do it. It could be a month here, it could be a month there
Mhm.
type of thing to where it can really even disrupt like a college semester.
Mhm.
I was picking away at college where I could, getting semesters in and getting creative and having teachers that kind of understood the game and would work with students pretty well. But so I got out in 2003, did some different training, did some exercises, did some shorter deployments, and then Katrina happened. So at the time, I was in a quick reaction force for the Louisiana Guard. And at the time, this is dating myself a little bit, but we carried beepers, government issued beeper.
Like a
And
pager?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, a pager, a
I
pager. It
remember
says,
my parents had pagers. That's
yeah,
hilarious.
call the unit, or
Yeah.
basically ours wasn't even call anyone. It was just if
Mhm.
this goes off, you go to the unit.
Yeah.
So like you had the ruck, you had the bee bag, they were always packed. You had a shaving kit that was just in there so you could just grab it and go as part of being in
Mhm.
this unit that the duty was quick reaction force for a set period of time. I can't remember, but we
Mhm.
were in it for well over a year. And so beepers go off like 3 in the morning, and hours hours later, we were on the road headed to New Orleans. So I ended up being in a unit that was at the Superdome before landfall of Katrina. So we were there for intake operations, for shelter of last resort. I was with my unit, company size element, and there was another quick reaction force there. So there's at one point, I think, two company size elements, one on days, one on nights, but then that kind of changed based on operations. Spent about 10 days there up through the full evacuation of the Superdome, and then about 5 months, 4 or 5 months in New Orleans after that. Mobility operations, being in the engineers, some security operations and disaster recovery type of operations. And then after that, I was finishing up my degree and transitioned up to North Dakota, where I was from originally, and got into the Guard up there and wasn't really doing a whole lot, just hanging out. And I think I'm trying to remember if I was finishing up my bachelor's or starting on my graduate degree. But in any case, doing some schoolwork, doing some pickup work, working on the farm, whatever. And there was a deployment coming up to Iraq and said, well, we're looking for volunteers. You fit the profile. You want to go? I said, yeah, sure. They called me and they said, so you'd consider? I said, no, I'll go. When are we leaving? Right. And then so I think that they weren't really getting a lot of answers like that. So then I started going into a workup, then went to Iraq. And that's where I saw all this paramilitary stuff. This was like the height of the KBR and Blackwater boom, like 2007, 2008. You see all these guys rolling around and you're like in military units running your operations and you see these guys. And I was working with the Corps of Engineers, the civilian Corps of Engineers at the time, running operations for them, doing some construction site surveillance and reconnaissance type of work, and then running ops with them. And so we had a contingent of contractors with us, both like UK based contractors, former SAS, SBS guys, and then also a contingent of Indian and British Gurkha brigade guys that were there, Nepalese Gurkhas. We really got the 31 flavors of people from all kinds of different experience. But again, the same thing, you're going out and you're doing ops with them and they're helping you make movement in some cases, then you're doing the reconnaissance piece of it, whatever. And so again, it's you're looking around. These are some really incredible men and women with these excellent backgrounds, excellent resumes, but you get to know them as people. So I can hang with these people and I can do some of this stuff as long as I pay attention and glean the knowledge and glean the information. So then after that deployment, I came back and I started thinking about it shortly thereafter. So well, maybe I can give this contractor gig a go. Started applying, did some networking, eventually got on. And then I was back in Afghanistan, hadn't been to Afghanistan yet. And so I ticked off 2 blocks at one time. So really for me, military transition came after getting back in the US, after contracting overseas. My wife said, okay, it's been fun. You've made some money. Enough is enough. Now you need to be home and you need to find a real job. And again, this is 2009, I think. So the economy wasn't good. It was even worse when you're a guy that's got military and paramilitary and you want to get a respectable job in HR or production and manufacturing or whatever it is that you want to do. So I ended up going to a career fair they were hiring for security positions at a nuclear plant here outside of Minneapolis. And if memory serves, I want to say there were like 600 or 700 applications and it was to fill 16 positions. And so these are pretty coveted roles. And I ended up interviewing pretty well. My resume matched, passed all the psych and did all of those things. And so I ended up going through a 10-week training program to be working on an NRC site, a nuclear site, defending the site. And during that time, I actually got picked up within the company that I got hired for into a consultancy role. So I got recruited within the company into a consulting role. So it really happened for me pretty quickly. It's, well, I'll take this security guard job. Granted, it was a high-end security guard job, but then I got recruited up, did some consulting work, eventually ended up working for some other firms, and here I am. So
I would hope that that nuclear security would be considered high end. It would be kind of funny if they were
yeah.
just hiring bums into into a
No,
nuclear power plant.
So I can tell you, and I suppose that maybe the quality of training, I think it's Department of Energy regulated, similar to a State Department program where it has to meet the curriculum. And there are certain things like their task condition standards that are standardized across the enterprise. I can only speak for the quality of training that I got when I went through I think it was a 10-week program.
Mhm.
It is some of the best shooting instruction that I've ever gotten in my life. And that's including military and paramilitary work, and particularly like on pistol craft. I thought I knew how to shoot pistols. I didn't, but I learned. So yeah. And so again, that's another component where you get the military training. Maybe you learn to shoot, move, shoot, communicate like in, conventional units. I got to glean a little bit in from working with like special operators on contracts and taking in some of that knowledge that they had from their training pipelines, and then doing training with the State Department and then through the DOE program. So you're just picking up all these different things. And these aren't just online courses. These are like long duration resident courses. So I consider myself pretty fortunate in that regard.
It's cool that you've been able to source skills training from so many different areas.
Mhm.
And it really does reinforce that initial what you said earlier, which is staying humble and staying humble after that ego death, to say you really can learn and enhance the same skill set from from a multitude of perspectives. And I think that's very important for people to remember as they get out of the military, which is especially officers or NCOs, which is, yeah, you've led people in the military, but leadership it looks a lot of different ways in a lot of different
Mhm.
places, and you can always learn to enhance your skill set that you bring out of the military through other perspectives and other means, which I think is something that's really important. Because for whatever reason, I think we always think, man, I led people in X military capacities. I don't really have much to learn from here. Like
Right,
I'm at the pinnacle, and I
right,
like this is it. And I think that's a flawed way of looking at things.
sure.
So when you did you know that when you got back from your like time as a contractor, like that was going to be it? Like, had you and your wife spoken beforehand, or was that something that that had happened?
So interestingly enough, I was on a year contract in Afghanistan
Mhm,
and we got about to the 9-month mark. And
mhm,
I don't know the reasons that the contract was coming to a close, but it was about the period of time where McChrystal was making a lot of changes in country about some of this AP stuff is coming out of there. And he really wanted to refit or refocus the war effort, make it more soft based. So I
mhm,
think with that, some of the contractor positions went away. I'm speculating a little bit, but I think it just had to deal with kind of McChrystal and how he was pivoting the strategic direction of the war fighting effort in
mhm,
Afghanistan. And as a result, the contract that we were on was coming to an end prematurely. And so we were basically getting notified. It's like, all right, boys, you've got until this date. You can stay up until this date. And then this is how you exfil out of the country. But if you're leaving sooner than that, here's like the soonest date you can leave and but it's considered contract fulfilled. So I didn't stay up until the bitter end because in fact, a buddy of mine that I'd met, we were on a 9-man team together supporting the battalion that we were supporting the Afghan Kandak. um, we got lined up with another contract that was in Iraq. And so we had it all set up. We were going to fly commercial out of Kandahar, go to Kuwait City, and then get on another commercial jump right into Baghdad. So we weren't even going to go home and refrad. We were just going to pack our stuff up, jump contracts one to another. And we were lined up. The paperwork was signed to do it. And my wife calls me, or we were on Skype. And at the time, I don't even know if it was Skype at the time, maybe, probably. But we got on the laptop for our weekly date, and she said, I like our weekly date, but it's just time to come home. It's like, okay, duly noted. So I'm going to scratch that. I'm going to come back. Did I know it was going to be the last time? No, but I also knew enough guys that had been on the circuit a lot longer than I had that kind of the rotation was okay, you're going to come over, you're going to make your 130, 40, 50, 60 grand, whatever your rate is for whatever you're earning. You're going to go home for 30 days or 60 days. You're going to buy a new Dodge truck. You're going to buy a new Harley. You're going to be broke. Then you're going to come back. Then by the next time, maybe your wife's going to divorce you. And then you're going to go back the next time. And maybe you've got a girlfriend and then you come back and it's a new relationship. So you're on Skype every night trying to hold that together. And just, I don't really have a bad setup at home. I needed to figure out the commercial aspect, but it's not like I hadn't saved some money. So I'd saved some money and had a little bit of a cushion. But I would say for me, that's really I've talked quite a bit about the ego deaths since we've been chatting. And I would say for me, that was really my first one. Cause up until that point, yeah, I was working as a civilian, but it was an extension of the military. So not really. It was similar mindset. I was around the same type of people. But now for the first time coming back from Afghanistan contracting, one, I was in my late 20s. I'd been a 6-figure earner. Now I wasn't making anything. And plus, I had to make that big pivot to getting into a respectable job and making what I thought that I deserved and should have been making. So that's where I burned up quite a bit of time. Then it's, well, how do they not see I'm awesome? Look at my resume. One, it was about 17 pages, which is too long. No one could read it. So those types of things. So from there, I just had to start peeling things away. One, with my own ego, it's maybe I'm not all that I think I am, or at least I need to demonstrate to people what my true value is. And I shouldn't expect them to just all over themselves with me. And then also even practical things like a resume, like a military resume is something that I think a lot of people have to come to terms with. It's start redlining, start taking the jargon out, learn how to translate it the right way. And I can say today, I'm not looking for a job, but I've got a 1-page resume and I've been working for over 20 years, if that's any point of reference.
Yeah, which is impressive, especially that you've been able to boil it down to just one. I have two. I have a short 2 pages right now, and
You're doing
that's
pretty well
yeah,
then. I see a lot of resumes come through too as a consequence of working on a consequence. I would say a benefit of working within the security industry is it attracts a lot of people that have former law enforcement or
Mhm.
former military backgrounds as well. I see some very good resumes come in when I post jobs and people apply to them. And I see some that I'm just like, oh,
Oh yeah,
and it's like,
yeah.
this is not good. And I know because I was that person too. It's you're in the army for 6 years and you've got a 15-page resume. It's like, brother, I got to help you. I got to help you out here.
um, so as and something that there's two places that I want to take this based off what you just said. The first comes down is preparation. So you're talking about how like a 15-page resume, not a super good idea. As someone who had a really quick like turnaround, like I'm done with contracting, my guard time has dwindled. What do you think what advice based off of your experience of trying to find your first real like civilian job, what advice would you give people out there on what to do outside of don't have a 15-page resume unless you're applying for a government civilian job, which is still the worst thing ever. As someone who's had to review those resumes, it sucks and I don't like that. But
Yeah.
what advice would you give people when it comes to the mechanics of preparing to leave the military?
Best advice, I would say hire me to write your resume. I'm joking, of course.
Yeah, you're not. Message Tyler on LinkedIn if you want to pay him to write your resume.
um, I mean, some of it's really tactical, but I can give the advice: take the jargon out and ask other people who maybe weren't in the military. Does this really pop to you? It's easy for me to say that now, but there's stuff that I was really attached to on my resume that this just has to be in there because it's part of my story and I'm so dang proud of it. But you have to remember, if anything, so I'll use this as a point of reference. I post for positions on a pretty regular basis, and I have Indeed recs that come directly to me or applications that come directly to me. And in the age of easy apply, it's not hard for someone to go through and apply for a bunch of stuff. So I can easily get 500 or 1,000 resumes. So you have to remember that there's someone on the other end of that as part of usually looking at resumes, particularly if it's a hiring manager and not a recruiter, it's an additional duty on top of their day job. So you have to write your resume to that 30-second scan. And it's like, what makes you pop and what makes you interesting within 30 seconds? Because no one's going to look through their detail by detail. So formatting is an important part of it. I think a little bit with color, something that makes you stand out, a good opening statement. For me, I think objective saying, well, I want an enriching, of course you want an enriching career. Of course you want a good job. And of course you want to make good money. The objective is an applied task. Your objective is that you're applying for the job because you want to do those things. Save that real estate for something that says why you're awesome, whether it's, I did this thing and really benefited the unit. I did this thing that demonstrated leadership. And I would say, and some might disagree on it, I think adding elements of like things that are professionally conducive but aren't necessarily work related are important too. I always like to see that volunteering experience when I'm looking at a resume, or if someone's into sports, or maybe they're coaching their kids' team, or maybe they climb mountains, maybe they do ultra running, whatever it is. I think it rounds out the person a little bit better because I think being super like career focused in your 20s and early 30s, that's one thing. But I think you start to pass that threshold. And if you're just careerly, what's your career focus? What's my next objectives? Am I going to make VP, senior VP, or whatever? It seems like those are the types of people that start to get imbalanced as they get a little bit older then, and they start to burn out because I think at some point everyone's, well, I want to make X amount of money, but maybe I don't need to make this much more. It's always about the promotion, but maybe I'm doing some stuff within my community and I'm happy with my family, or I have a nice garden, or whatever it is that you value. So it's finding that balance. And so I think I'm sure you've probably heard the term total soldier concept back in the day.
We call it the whole
It's
airman concept. So
okay.
over in Air Force land in our air
Yeah.
conditioning and whatnot. So
Yeah. Same thing though. So it's like the total cold or total soldier, total airman concept.
mhm,
It's the same thing for professionals. It's have the education, have the work experience, have the progressive career growth and roles,
mhm.
has some coherence of how these things feed into each other, even if you are dabbling a little bit, if you can have some lines of connection. And, but then also, how are you balanced as a person? Because no one wants someone that's so wired tight that they're going to be a jerk and disrupt the rest of the team. That's, you got to, you get in, but then you got to fit in too, right? And then add value.
The other thing I want to ask about for folks who are really been in combat arms, something you've highlighted that I think is really important is that your skill set's hard to translate. Like it is really hard to find someone who has done what I believe is the most important work in the military, which is being on the front lines, defending objectives, taking fire, being in those really bad areas of the world. As someone now who has been out for a while, who has been reviewing a lot of resumes, hiring people in, what advice would you give to those servicemen and women who are in combat arms on how to effectively tell someone what they're worth, even though the job might be very different to what they're applying to?
Sure. So I think it depends. I think it's a little bit easier for combat arms people to transition into career fields that are like a little bit more human capital, operationally intensive. For me, it was easy. I transitioned into security. So I was like an account rep to start with. So basically, I had a few bubbas, right? And so well, I did that in the military. So that was an easier transition for me than if I was going from combat arms to be an HR rep or like some sort of like a
Mhm.
specialized individual contributor. So I don't know if I could answer that one really well because I think for me it was a direct translation of you're leading people, they're doing a little bit different stuff in a little bit different uniform, but you still have problems that come up. You have your operations that you're planning for, you have your changes in those operations and you're adjusting. Um, One of the things that really did help me when I eventually died the ego death and started translating my value to prospective employers or organizations a little bit better was really thinking back to like project management experience that I got in the military, just like as a consequence of being in the Corps of Engineers and being in the engineering regiments in general. And then really started diving into learning those methodologies and the lingo that went along with that. Because I think for a lot of combat arms people, there's some real parallels to true proper project management. And I say not, well, I did this project, so I'm a project manager. No, actually, you understand agile, you understand waterfall, you understand some of the methodologies and some of the methods and like requirements gathering, those different things. I think if you can take a step back and look at like project management methodology in particular, it's an easier way to translate that to corporations because corporations are familiar with project management methodology. And I would say even later in my career now, I've been able to pivot from more operationally focused part of the security industry into PMO, like leveraging project management. Now I'm leading project managers. And then even more recently, I've transitioned very much into like software development leadership and DevOps for like integrations and those types of things. And so really project management is pretty fundamental to life as far as I'm concerned. And so potentially if you're not quite sure how to do it and you're at the point where you're developing skill sets or wanting to get certifications, maybe look at project management.
Are there any specific resources that you would recommend that people look at to start learning more about project management so that they can begin to translate those skill sets? Because maybe they don't want to be a project manager, but if
Right.
they want to find a language to speak so that an employer can understand what they bring to the table, are there any specific resources that you would recommend that people look at?
Well, so the most respected organization for project management knowledge certifications is Professional or Project Management Institute, excuse me, PMI. So go to their website, check them out. Some of the stuff is cheap, some of it's probably expensive. I guess if you're floating around on LinkedIn, Matt Quick works for PMI, and he's also been a big veteran advocate for years and years. And he actually publishes stuff occasionally about where can retirees go to get a PMP certification, or where can active duty members or reservists, and some of them are at low cost or at no cost. So I would say he's definitely a good resource. And then, although I haven't really delved into it much yet, you hear a lot of buzz around like the Coursera types of courses that are free. And I'm probably going to take one pretty soon on competitive intelligence, because I just want to learn more about that. And what the heck, it's a 10-hour module and it's no cost. So I think there's so much stuff out there now. And I think if I could have done anything different, well, maybe I wouldn't say I would do it different, but in terms of being a veteran transitioning now, it's tough in some ways because the economy is a little bit tougher, but there's so much more information out there now. You're not left just going to your military transitions. They give you, or you go to the career fair. I think when I went through the career fair as well, maybe I can either go to Border Patrol, LAPD, or NYPD. Those are the options for a kid like me. So there's just so much more stuff out there. And then of course, social media and like LinkedIn in general, depending on what channels you swim in, is a pretty good resource. And really you can start reaching out to folks and say, hey, I listened to this podcast, or I see you posting, and what piece of advice would you give? It seems like information just, there's a lot more junk information out there now, but there's also a lot of good information that's more accessible now.
I would definitely say that the struggle that people have today is tuning out things that don't matter versus finding any. It's like sifting through all of the information to find those nuggets of good information versus finding any information that you can possibly find, which is
Right.
yeah, which is definitely having the ability to sift through information is a skill set in and of itself that I think people are going to have to develop, which I think is hard to do, to say the least. So for you, after you left contracting, you got into security. For you, what was it like emotionally moving out of that really operationalized world of the military and into security?
So some aspects of it remained the same. I would say it's just like different kind of op tempo. I think my first gig in security, after I went from the plant to a consulting gig, and then I got like my first account role, and I think I had people. So it was like a heavy squad, so it wasn't too bad. And within a year, I'd taken on a national account for a Fortune 500 client. So I went to where I had 90 FTEs, or 90 people. So pretty quickly, I went to where I had a company sized element of folks, and I was still learning how to be a full on civilian myself. Fortunately, like the security industry, it's a little bit more forgiving because military and law enforcement is feeder into that. And then a lot of your clients you're working with are ex-military and ex-police as well. But then you have some folks who just came up through non-traditional paths into those roles as too. So for me, and again, it took a while, but I was operating at a volume 10. So a lot of it through making mistakes and like interactions and how I presented information, even communicating in emails and those types of things. I learned some hard lessons, but figured out how to start dialing it back to an acceptable level. So, maybe I'm operating at a 7 then, to where I have the intensity and the operational focus to be effective as a leader in a fairly tactically focused organization. But at the same time, I'm not wired so tight that I can't get along with my colleagues and I can't be productive for my client or my organization. So for me, it was turning it back to a 7. And then eventually my age caught up with that 7, to where the 7 is really just natural for me anyway. And it works.
And for you, So, well, where I'll start is I think for a lot of people, and you're a really good person to ask about this because you interact with a lot of ex-military folks in the security world. I really do think that people do not prepare themselves well for the loss of purpose that comes with leaving the military. Just because, again, security is great, but it's very different defending a nuclear power plant or a Fortune 500 company than it is defending an objective for the United States of America. Like it just has,
Yeah.
it's just different. And
Mhm.
so, how do you feel like you did with making that adjustment of shifting your purpose off of the military and into something else? And what do you think people who are about to leave the service need to do to be able to do that effectively?
So I'll say for a long time, I didn't do it very well.
Mm,
I was too intense. I was too direct. I valued like operational planning and operational outputs above networking in some cases.
mhm,
So I think you have to find a good balance of being able to network and value that as highly as you do like operational outputs.
mhm,
Because the reality is, it's not entirely a meritocracy wherever you go.
mm,
You've got to be able to know the right people to get into the right doors and to make good impressions. So networking a bit better. And then the other thing that really I wasted about 10 years not doing it. I think it would have rounded me out better earlier. Find some doggone hobbies and not just going to the gym. Yes, I had the military dude or gal go to the gym and crush it hobby like a lot of people, and fitness is important. I think it helps. It helps clear your mind and things like that. But find some other hobbies, something that you enjoy doing, whether it's reading. I really like gardening. I got into mountaineering. And I found that some of these things I do, there's still like methodical planning that goes along with it, like gardening. That's like a year-long agile cycle, and it's year after year improving systems. Or mountaineering, between mountaineering and like military
if you don't do
command or
planning and mountaineering, you're hosed. You
right,
can really screw yourself bad.
right. And so a lot of those corporate mantras about like they take things from reaching objectives, like from mountaineering or from like military decision making and planning, those directly correlate. But even if that's not your
Mhm,
deal, don't do it just because you think it's going to make you a better professional or it's going to make you look cool or something like that. Just find stuff that you like to do, because even if maybe you're not in a position you think is at the level you want to be at, or maybe you're not making as much money as you want to be making it. Find some hobbies that are fairly affordable that you can go out and just get away from it. And again, other than the gym, yes to the gym, yes to the working out, running, all of that other good stuff, but find something to do that's not that, and
mhm.
it'll round you out a lot better, a lot faster. I wish I had done that about 10 years before I did.
I think that is such an amazing thing to talk about because I think that the thing that we lose when we leave the military is like this monolith of our life. Everything in our life is wrapped up in the military,
Mhm.
and you really don't have to account for much when you're in the service. Like everything's planned out. Like you said earlier, you have your pipeline, you've got your schools, you've got your training, you show up to a unit, those are your friends, those are the people you're going to be around. Those are really like a lot of what you do on your off time, especially if you're in combat arms, is you're going to be prepping for training, staying in shape for training, prepping for your next deployment cycle, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. It's all really wrapped up in like job, friends, purpose. It's all there. Then you leave the
Mhm.
military and it's not that way at all. And you have to build this well rounded person, the whole airman concept or the total soldier concept, but now it's the total civilian, now it's the just the total human concept.
Mhm.
And we're really bad at that. Like we don't know how
Yeah.
to do that as military members, and I think that you saying that I think is so important because hobbies, community, these holistic life things are the
Mhm.
pieces that people don't really do, and people really don't have that dialed in well at all. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
hobbies are not a waste of time, man. They're a force multiplier if applied properly.
Yeah, I completely agree. How did you figure out what was the process for you for figuring out what kind of hobbies you were into? How did you arrive at gardening and mountaineering? Because those are some pretty funny, those are some fun. I like those are fun things to do, but how did you
Yeah.
arrive at those are the things that I'm gonna like stick with?
So for the gardening, I grew up on a family farm. So I won't we were by no means 100% subsistence lifestyle, like on some of the TV shows or anything. But we absolutely hunted food to eat and we grew vegetables to eat and we operated a farm and we had animals and all those types of things. So I think for me, it was returning to my roots a little bit, getting back into something that had been missing from my life. And once I started doing it, even though I wasn't very good at it to start and still getting established, I realized that it had been missing. And like now, even though there's a lot of work involved, it's work that I love and I couldn't do without it. So I think the gardening was getting back to my roots a little bit. And I really care about sustainability and sustainable systems and not being a jerk to the planet and all of that stuff. So I think it just fits right in there. And I think I was probably even doing it before it really got in vogue again, where it was farm to table and all of that stuff. So maybe I was a little bit ahead of the curve on that front. But so it's conducive, I think. As far as the mountaineering, it's an interesting story. And I talked with someone else about it recently on a podcast. The Army had this training course. It's called Master Resiliency Training or Resiliency Training. And so it seemed like it was an early attempt by the military or the Army in any case to really focus on like mental well-being and more so even mindset. Like you can get courses now for mindset and get the rub from different people who are doing awesome stuff. And so that was the Army's attempt at it. But they had these training sessions that was led by an instructor that would come in and we would talk about our struggles and we'd also talk about things we can do to like, picking the good stuff from something that we're doing, look at not getting stuck in negativity, those types of things. But one of these exercises was asking us what's our dream or what's our goals, right? In life, meaning what's a lifetime goal? One of my friends had said, someday I want to climb a mountain. And I don't remember what I said. Someone else said they want to do a marathon, kind of normal stuff, right? And so, good friend of mine, and I went away from that session. So this was on a drill weekend. I was already a reservist at that time. I was back at my job at doing corporate security stuff. And I was thinking about that. I'm thinking to myself, well, I really like this guy and I want him to be able to do this. And I knew that it was one of those things that he might have done it on his own. He's an incredible guy, very resourceful, but it's also one of those things that it could easily be the someday until there's no days left. And that was really sticking with me. So it's, well, I'm going to get on the internet. I'm going to look and what goes into this. So I found that the second tallest mountain in the lower 48 was not very technical climb and it's super tall. So kind of cool. And it was in an area where it's a cool, like guys trip is Leadville, Colorado and Mount Elbert. Right. So there you go. So there you go. So it's like nothing too hairy about it, but still something pretty cool to go out there and tackle. So I started organizing this thing. And so we can go on these dates. We can take my car. We can drive out. So I ended up pitching it to these guys. And so me and a few fellows got in the Subaru and we rolled out to Leadville and we did it. It was a nice weekend. Got to hang out in Leadville. It was a fun time. Climb Mount Elbert. We got the summit picked together and we were sitting having a breakfast burrito, like out on Main Street there on their version of a patio as a sidewalk. And he said, I've always wanted to climb a mountain. I said, yeah, man, that's why we're here. And so I think then it really sucked in for him. So it was fulfilling for me, right, to be able to operationalize this and put it together and keep it from being a someday that never happened for him and help out a friend. And then I just found it's, well, if I can do that, what else can I do? And then insert chaos after that. And pretty soon you're bagging peaks and you're leading technical trips and it all just snowballs.
One of the reasons why I reached out to you is I love mountain climbing. I did it when I was in college. The Air Force then stationed me in the flattest places on earth. So it's always funny. Like I remember I was in school in Colorado, and then I was like, man, when I graduate and I become a second lieutenant, I'm gonna climb so many mountains. They were like, or you can go to Biloxi, Mississippi. I know exactly where you were in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, but then they were like, and then you can go to Oklahoma City. and it's flat there too. And no, I remember seeing some of your content. I was like, man, this guy gets it. Mountaineering is so much fun, and it really is like such an amazing experience getting on top of those mountains. I'm happy
Mhm.
none of your guys got altitude sickness, because we had a couple of people who did.
Oh,
In my
really?
Yeah, the first time we did Mount Elbert, we had one of the guys, we I had to do it twice, because the first time we were going up, and the first real bummer of that climb was we were walking up, and then two dudes who were training for the Leadville 100, which,
Mhm.
for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's the highest altitude ultra marathon, at least in America. I want to say in the world, but I can't say that definitively, because I'm sure that there's some people running.
It's a serious race. It is
It's
no
a
joke.
Yeah, no, it's you're intense. So I'm hiking up there. We're going at what I thought was a reasonably fast pace, and then two dudes and their dog ran past us, and they had a water bottle and running clothes on, and I
Right.
had gear, and that was really depressing, especially when they passed us coming downhill 20 minutes later, and we were only halfway up. So that was a super bummer for me. And then the second part was one of my friends got altitude sickness, maybe a couple hundred feet before we summited, and we had to go back down because we didn't have anywhere to leave that person, and we didn't want them to wander off of the mountain, so we had to take them back down, and then had to summit Elbert at a different date, which was a real bummer, but I got to see the pretty views twice.
Nice. Nice.
It is
So
what
do
it
you have any objectives planned or any climbs planned or something that you really want to do?
Nothing. So I would love. My wife and I are planning to do Mount Shasta in
Nice.
California, because I have not done any serious mountaineering now that my wife is stationed out here in California. And then there's another. I think it's White Mountain, which is down near Mammoth. Those are the two. Those are two of the 14ers that I really want to do while I'm down here, because the views are spectacular. Shasta, I've always had a real fascination for mountains that are super tall, that are not part of a range. So Shasta in California.
All the volcanoes,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah, Shasta, or the one that I'm blanking on. Yep,
Hood,
Hood. Thank you.
Rainier,
Yep, Hood, Rainier.
everything, most of everything in Washington,
Yeah,
pretty much.
exactly. So like
Yeah.
those ones I think are really fascinating. Someday I would love to do the big mountain on the Big Island in Hawaii. I think that would be really fascinating to
Mhm.
go from sea level to 14,000 feet, even though that might kill me. So we'll see. But Shasta and White Mountain are the two that I'm really interested in
Well,
knocking out.
Shasta's like a good alpine objective too. I don't know if it's glaciered year round, but at least in some months, it's an alpine objective. I've been on Hood once and I've been on Rainier 3 times.
Yeah.
So
Did you do
yeah, kind
Rainier
of,
during the winter or
oh, no,
in no? Yeah.
no,
Okay.
summertime. And out in California, I did Whitney the same year that we did that Albert trek.
Oh,
So
cool.
right after we did Whitney, well, it was late season. I sorted it out, found a friend and did Whitney. So that was like
Sweet.
my first two quote unquote.
How was the Whitney climb? Was it difficult, or was it
Yeah, we did it single push and it was
okay?
a bear.
Yeah, I believe it.
I, I was okay. My partner was not quite as fit as I was, even being in top shape. Like if you have a little bit of a weather delay or something like that, forget
Yeah, it's
about
gonna
it. You
get
don't
you.
want to get caught up there. I took a group and we attempted Williamson this last year. That's a long slog. Like it's a 30-mile approach and that's big
Yeah.
mountain country.
Who are you taking up? Who are you finding to be part of these groups that you take up?
So it's primarily been social circles, and in some cases, it's like I've gone up with some folks that were new to me, but like friend of a friend type of
Mhm,
situation.
mhm.
I've got a good friend. He lives down in Texas. He was a former special operator, and in fact, we met on a contract. He's like a Marine MARSOC guy or whatever. And I was posting about climbing on LinkedIn, and someone in the comments like, "I'd like to go climbing sometime." And he saw the post on LinkedIn and he DM'd me and said, "Hey, I saw someone ask you, it's you looking for climbing partners?" I said, "I am." So we actually went up Rainier last year, and then we ended up going up Williamson as well. So leveraging social media for climbing partners, if nothing else.
I love that. Hey, listen, there's a lot of people who want to go up mountains. It's a great place to find folks. Something that I'm interested in for social media is how did you build kind of your passion for posting on LinkedIn? Because I think a lot of people are going to watch this are most likely
Yeah.
people that are part of your network.
Yeah.
And so, how give them the origin story that they've always wanted to hear on Tyler's rise on LinkedIn?
I don't know if I would call it a rise, maybe a rise to journeyman mediocrity, but in any case, so I'm of a generation I'm 1 foot in like analog pre-internet and then 1 foot post-internet. I'm a young Gen Xer or an elder millennial, I guess, however you slice it or dice it. But so I've never really been a huge social media guy at all. It's just not really been my deal. But a couple of years ago, I was with a previous firm that I had been working with for 9 years, and I was going to be there and had career opportunities and growth and saw no reason to leave. They took good care of me. And so I tried to take good care of them as well. And the company was in the process of being acquired, or in fact, there was some news around rumblings of maybe it was going to be acquired, and then it eventually happened. And so I decided whether I stayed with the company post acquisition or not. I hadn't really decided yet, but I knew that I needed to start diversifying my portfolio in a sense. So, not being like a traditional social media person, Instagram, Facebook, some of that stuff really didn't appeal to me. But well, LinkedIn is professional and I'm going to start posting stuff. Well, I started posting stuff that was not good at all. My content was terrible. It was boring. No one liked it. No one read it, whatever. And then I just started posting things that I wanted to post. So it's what I was telling you about earlier. It's like with your career too. Find things that you want to do and you can play the long game longer than a lot of other people as long as what you like what you're doing. So instead of niching down and just talking about security management or root cause analysis or some of these other things that I tried to do and was failing dismally at, I just started posting about stuff that I like to post about. And because it's LinkedIn, I still try to find some means of leadership value or professional value in it. And it's morphed to this point where I probably even roll a little bit fast and loose for LinkedIn, but I've got a pretty cool audience of people who like what I'm putting out, and it enables me to find other people who are into the same stuff so then I can reciprocate and I see their content, what they're doing. You meet climbing partners. I've met people who are genuine friends off the platform. So even at times when I get pretty busy, it's, well, do I really want to post today or do I really want to keep doing it? I just think back, well, I've met some really awesome people and learned some really cool stuff by being on here. So for me, leveraging LinkedIn or operationalizing LinkedIn the juice has been worth the squeeze. And for me, I'm going back like to the security industry discussion. I'm still very early for my industry on LinkedIn, and it's a very buttoned up industry. And so with that, you get a little bit of heat for it. And so what is this guy doing? He can't be taken seriously. So that may be, but at the same time, 250,000 of y'all are reading my stuff every year. So if you have a voice, you have a narrative, and you can kind of dictate what that is. So you just take the good with the bad with it.
No, it definitely makes sense. And I think that I really do enjoy your posting style on LinkedIn. I think it definitely does. It feels authentic in the sense that you read it and you go, oh, yeah, like he's just really talking about what he wants versus someone who goes and just takes some random event and then let me like absolutely squeeze the last, like, let me just draw this really obtuse connection from I don't know. I don't even know. Some random thing to this really obscure leadership lesson. It's like, hey, like I don't know. I don't know if that was really worth your time, but it is what it is. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
The reality is it's real people who are reading the stuff. And you know what? Maybe they're working their job and they're trying to get promoted. Maybe a raccoon knocked over their trash cans that morning and they were picking up milk cartons and junk off their
yep.
driveway. That's the reality, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as someone who has really done a good job of building this holistic lifestyle, having community, what would be your advice to folks on fostering community specifically? Because I think that it's one of the it's going to be the thing that kind of makes or breaks someone in not just a military transition but life transitions. So, what do you think you've done well there, and what would you recommend to others to follow in your footsteps?
I'll start with the disclaimer that I haven't always done it well. I've been
Mhm,
selfish at times. And again, I overvalued my own ego versus what my real value was and
mhm.
value add to the people that I was around. And it wasn't just the me show.
Yeah.
So I would say that for me, it's considering the other perspective on most things, like playing devil's advocate in some cases, like when you're in conflict and really thinking about what are they doing. I think that even really applies to operational leadership. One of the biggest parts of intelligence is thinking like your enemy, right? Or thinking about the opposite or how the opposition is thinking. It's the same in business as well, whether you're dealing in competitive intelligence and competitive counterintelligence, like you're
Mhm,
thinking, what's the other side thinking about? It's the same thing with a producer consumer economy. And so for me, even writing style and building a LinkedIn community or in the way that I go about my life, it's what things do I do that I care about that benefits my audience? And I'm going to highlight those things or benefits my community. Even just in your community, it's think about what other people want out of it. And from that, what are you willing to give? Because if you can determine what things other people want, but things that
mhm,
you're happy to give, that's how communities are formed where there's good mutual benefit, right? You
mhm,
can't give too much of yourself and you shouldn't change who you are to just try and appease and give.
mhm,
But find the things that make you happy to give, that you recognize that the people that you're around in whatever that organization is, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's your church, whether it's your business, whether it's your bowling team, whatever it is, and identify those things. Because again, if you're happy to give those things and they're happy to receive them, you're always going to have a place and you're always going to be happy to do it. That's the long game.
I think that the concept of giving is incredibly important because if you join the military, you're a service oriented human being. And depending on if you're religious or if you're just trying to live in an upstanding, like you said, ethical, moral lifestyle,
Yep.
there's really themes in all of those things that are to be a giving person. And so regardless of what you believe, I believe that we as a species were created with a desire to give in some way, shape, or form. And if
Mhm.
you don't find some avenue to do so, you're really robbing yourself of a wonderful, like there's something wonderful there to be accessed, not just for you, but for those that you're providing for. And not doing that, you're really robbing yourself of something great. And so I think that
I, w-
that's an amazing thing to say.
I would even hazard to say that folks who are more focused on just what can I get out of it, they miss that part,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
And it leads to, it can go from I don't have enough to it's never enough pretty
Mhm.
quickly.
Yeah. And at some point, if you view yourself as if you're like this human vessel, if you have a max capacity that you can hold within yourself, and
Mhm.
if you just keep taking and taking, at some point the vessel explodes. And so there has to be one of my friends brought up this really amazing analogy of you have in over in Israel or in that area, you have the Sea of I believe it's the Sea of Galilee and then the Dead Sea. I know there is a sea that feeds into the Dead Sea, and I'm pretty sure it's the Sea of Galilee, and I can't
Mhm.
remember if that's what it is, but the Sea of Galilee has life in it. It's beautiful. It's great. I've been there. It's really nice to swim in, great water temperature. And then you drive a couple tens of miles south and you're in the Dead Sea, which has no output. The Sea of Galilee has water that comes in and there's water that goes out, and that water feeds in the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea has no output, and it nothing lives there because it literally can't sustain life. And so if you're a
Hmm.
human being that only ever intakes, you're going to cultivate something that is inherently incapable of sustaining life within yourself.
Or
And
stagnate at a minimum.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And
I
you,
like that a lot, man. That's
yeah,
good.
wasn't me. That was definitely my friend, but I tell a lot of people that now when I
Yeah, it's
talk
good
about
stuff.
finding service. And so I think that talking about that, finding an opportunity to give, which then gives you a chance to find community, I think is an amazing way of processing that. One other question that I'll have for you is as you've gone out to try your hand at a lot of different things, whether it's doing the mountaineering thing when your friend was like, I want to climb a mountain. You're like, you're not thinking about it. We're going to go do it.
Right.
Or applying to these jobs in security or starting to post things on LinkedIn. You really have this lean forward mindset, this initiative. How do you think you've cultivated that initiative? And how do you think, because I think that a lot of people in times of uncertainty, don't. They're like, I'm going to stay like in this place that's safe. I don't want to take chances. How does somebody cultivate that initiative based mindset to be able to go out and try things and also not fear the repercussions of it possibly failing, in your opinion?
So I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been injured for a while now. Since last October, I got hurt training up for a bicycle, like a fat tire ultra marathon. So even now, I'm still doing rehab and stuff. And so this year's climbing season shot for me. I haven't been able to do some of the stuff that I want to do. And I was thinking about it. And like my wife asked me, she's like, well, are you doing okay? You can't do all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. Is it great? Do I love it? No, not at all, but it's also not the end of the world. And I think that the reason I'm not struggling with this as much, even though it's not quite what I want it to be right now, but I can come back, is because I went through that transition from the military, right? Where it's, well, I do all these things and I had to die that slow ego death, right? But I came out of it like a different person in a lot of ways, still core values intact, but a lot more thoughtful and considerate of others, I think, and a lot more flexible to try different things. So it's, well, even if I'm not hardcore endurance guy ever again, I'm going to figure out something. I'm going to be okay. And I would even equate that then to trying other things. It's like you have resilience from failing. And it sucks that, but I mean, the reality is no one goes undefeated in life. People might say they do, but it's not really true. So it's like just taking those failures to heart, how it felt, and knowing that what's the worst that's going to happen if I fail? I came out of the military. I came from a high paid contractor gig, and then I went to making 13.50 an hour as a security officer. And I sorted it out all over again. So if I post a post on LinkedIn and people laugh at me, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to keep going, and pretty soon I can write what I want and everyone knows about it. And I get invited on podcasts and I get to talk with cool people and I get to meet new friends and have a broader network. So it's whatever.
I think that looking back at your past experiences to be able to say I've survived up until this point so that there's
Mhm.
no reason to think I won't in the future is a really amazing thing to call out. And what I'll also say is you are someone now who really has diversified
Mhm.
their values in life. Like you don't weight anything so extremely that if the legs get kicked out under one specific thing, your life isn't going to crumble due to that. And I think that's something really important for people to remember, and it's something that I've talked to different folks on this podcast about, which is you should be if you are a person who's really putting all of their life purpose and meaning on one thing in your life, you got to be really careful with that, because if
Yep.
that's the case, then anything that happens to that thing, whether it be a job, a title, a person, whatever it is, if that thing goes away, then what are you outside of that? And I think that that at the end of the day is the struggle that most military members go through, because it's very easy for someone who joins at 18 when you don't really have an identity yet to build their identity around this one concept, and then that concept goes away, and then it's like, shit, who am I without this
Yep.
thing? And I think that's you, because you have done a good job of not doing that, you can sustain a climbing injury and go, well, that's not who I am. Like if I'm
Right.
not climbing mountains this season, I'm not less of Tyler. I'm just not getting to climb this season. And I think that's really important to understand.
What's interesting, like all the rage right now is you got to have side hustles and you have to have multiple revenue streams and
Mhm,
passive income and all of this other stuff, which there's probably some truth to that. And it's what you were talking about. So, well, what if you get laid off or what if you get fired?
mhm,
Well, now what? Now you're broke and you have no income or whatever. So you have to, so it's the same thing with your identity. I think you should be a little bit selfish with your identity, particularly as you start to get a little bit older and you have the wherewithal to where you're starting to get comfortable in your own skin and you can decide, well, I
mhm,
want to do these things not because I fit into this category or that category. It's because it's just part of being me. And maybe some of it's cool. Maybe people will like me for some of it. Maybe they won't like me for some of the other stuff. I'll deal with that because again, to your point, like one of those things goes away, you're not lost without it. Yeah. I'm Tyler, the army guy somewhat, but not really. I'm just a guy who does stuff that I like to do. Right.
exactly. And I think that because you have that mentality, that allows you to roll with the punches of life a lot more, because any anything that affects one aspect of you is not going to affect the whole or the core of who you are, which I think is really awesome. Last question before we close out. What is the final piece of advice that you want to leave folks with in terms of how to prepare for their military transition?
That's a good one. I need to think about it for a second because I don't
Okay.
want to just give out some junk advice here.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
Um,
I can edit down 5 minutes of silence to be zero minutes of silence if we need that.
so I think it's two part for me, and we've really talked about both elements of it at length. Is identity, be selfish with your own individual identity, meaning
Mhm,
do things that you want to do, be who you want to be because you truly want to be that way.
mhm,
And even if it's not for the people that are around you, eventually you'll find the people that get you, right? So be selfish with your own identity because if your identity is diversified, nothing's catastrophic when there's a change, right?
mhm.
Even if one aspect of it is taken away, whether it's military service, climbing, a job, whatever. So you're a lot more resilient because you're diversified in terms of who you are as a person. And then the other part of it is if you're starting to get that ego struggle of, well, I'm too good and they don't recognize or they don't recognize my awesomeness, just take a step back, look at it pragmatically. Don't sell yourself short. But if that ego's got to die, just kill it quickly and save that time. I wish I'd done my first ego death probably 10 years before I did it.
I think that letting go of those past experiences and that ego, I think, is really hard. And I think that for a lot of people, like, you don't even know you have it until it's dead. And then you go,
Yep.
"Oh man, I guess I was really caught up on that thing," which is hard. Yeah, for everyone out there, really take some time and examine yourself and really think about, what are you overly attached to? What is the thing that's going to hold you back? And if you're still in the military and you're listening to this is the work that you can put in many years in advance, because finding a job takes probably 6 months, less so depending on the company. Figuring out your identity after the military, that takes years. So it
Mhm.
takes some time to do that. But Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely incredible to get to talk to you. I'm very grateful for your time and for bearing yourself before everyone here on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate you, brother. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And for everyone else who's out there who's listening, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you so much for making it to the end. If you like this content, please can subscribe on whatever platform you're on and share with people who would benefit from this message. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Post Military Podcast. Peace.